This is Alabama Crimson Tide football recruiting on BamaInsider.com. Trey Yanity, joined as always by Andrew Bone. Bone, of course, a member of BamaInsider.com, a legend at BamaInsider.com, the industry standard in recruiting. Guys, if you haven't yet, go follow him on Twitter at Andrew J. Bone. Check out his work on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Go check out his books there. A lot of great work out. And, a lot of coverage these last few weeks, obviously. This was the final stretch leading up to signing day. Got those videos out for you guys on BamaInsider.com. And a lot of coverage, obviously, leading up to a big day, big few days for Alabama. And Alabama, of course, finishing on Rivals.com. The #1 signing class in the country. Excited to break it down today. Guys, we get into this video, hit the like button for me. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so, and get in the comments. This show tonight is being pre-recorded, so we will not be able to take questions as we typically do at the end of the show. But hey, that doesn't mean you can't get in there. Leave a comment. Let us know how you're feeling about this class and everything going on with Alabama football. Bone, how are you doing tonight? Talk about this signing class, your thoughts. I know you've now had the chance to take a little bit of a breath, a week removed now. What are your thoughts overall about this 2022 signing class with the early period here?
Yeah, obviously it's a great class. I mean, it's one of Coach Saban's best, and it's crazy because you look at Alabama right now, and they are in the Rivals team rankings currently #2. They finished #1 during the early signing period, but Texas A&M ended up getting a commitment from Denver Harris on Saturday, which we expected. We didn't expect him at Alabama, so that was a big commitment for the Aggies, and obviously they had a great class, but I don't think if you look at Alabama's class, anybody's going to be disappointed with it at all. I mean, it's one of Coach Saban's best. I mean, from top to bottom, just an incredible group of prospects on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. They hit some home runs late in the process, and they got a lot of commitments early. And we've talked about this before. How one of the biggest things is being able to keep the guys that you have committed solid throughout the entire process. And obviously we saw a couple guys that ended up flipping on during the early signing period, but most of the other guys, the guys that were really important to this recruiting class, stayed on board throughout the entire process. I mean, we saw Jaheim Otis getting a lot of attention from Mississippi or Ole Miss and Mississippi State. I mean, there was just a lot of talk that he was going to flip to one of those programs, especially coming out of Oxford. They really felt like he was going to flip before he made that official visit to Alabama 2 weekends ago. And then with Aaron Anderson, really being able to withstand the home state pressure and of going to LSU. Even though he had decommitted from LSU back in late October, there was a lot of pressure on him once that new staff came in, especially knowing the fact that Alabama was getting Shaz Preston, that they were in the driver's seat for Kendrick Law, two of the other top 3 wide receivers in the state of Louisiana. So losing out on 3 of the top 3 wide receivers in Louisiana, that's something LSU didn't want to do. And Alabama was able to secure all 3 of those guys. So, I think overall, outstanding class. You got a big number of those guys that are early enrollees. So getting those guys on campus in the next couple of weeks. Already have one on campus in Ty Simpson, but getting the rest of those guys on campus on January the 11th is really big. It's going to be really big for their future, and certainly big for Alabama to go ahead and get those guys acclimated with the system and go ahead and start developing them, and hopefully all those guys have a good spring practice.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Always fun to see the early enrollees. Like you said, Ty Simpson already getting to campus. I don't know if you saw the quote today from Will Anderson. He actually went up to Ty Simpson and told him, "Hey, man, it's all right. Don't worry about it right now. I'm not going to attack you too hard. Come at you. But when the spring comes around, I'm going to be in your face. So watch out." Guys, if you haven't seen that clip, go check it out on our YouTube page here. But, really an outstanding class, like you said, and a lot of great receivers, some great defenders as well. But overall, who's going to provide the most immediate impact? What are the biggest strengths of this signing class?
Well, I think strengths-wise, I look at the wide receiver position. Man, just an incredible group there, wide receivers / tight ends, because, you signed just an incredible group with Shaz Preston, Isaiah Bond, Kobe Prentice, Kendrick Law, and Aaron Anderson, but you also get a major offensive weapon in Amari Neblack, who is going to be enrolling early, and that's a guy that I feel like Alabama fans should get to know well, because this is a special kid. I remember a couple of years ago when Will Anderson ended up signing, I remember Alabama saying, this is a guy that really need to watch for. He's going to be an impact player early on in his career. And obviously he was a pretty big impact player. And that's kind of the same things that I'm hearing about Amari Niblack. This is a big offensive weapon. He's a mismatch on the outside. You can line him up in the slot. You can line him up at tight end. He's 6'4", right around 230 pounds. 4'5", 40, and this is just one of the best athletes in the country. That I remember when he first committed to Alabama, people were questioning because his profile page said 6'2", 197 pounds, but it hadn't been updated since he was like a freshman in high school. When a lot of these profile pages get originally created, a lot of times the height and weights don't get updated throughout the years. So you got to kind of stay on top of that. But he certainly hit a growth spurt, got a little bit bigger, faster, and has blossomed into, obviously one of the top high school football players in the country. And now he's going to be enrolling at Alabama. You also have, a tremendous, defensive lineman in Jaheim Otis, who is a, absolute monster. I still think he's probably needs a year to really kind of hit the weight room, get right with his weight. And he's 370 pounds plus right now, but the fact that he's getting there early, getting there in January, and going ahead and starting to work out with Dr. Matt Ray and David Ballou and that whole strength and conditioning program, they're going to get him right. I have no doubt about that. This is a absolute monster on the interior, and I think Alabama is really excited about him just because of his athleticism and his footwork, and the way that he moves, his quickness off the ball, and and his best days, in my opinion, are ahead of him. He says 348 there. I think that's being really generous on his profile page, but I think another guy that we're probably going to see make an impact early, and we'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute, is Eli Rix, is the former LSU defensive back who announced on Wednesday night that he's going to transfer to Alabama. I think he's got a really good chance to make an early impact in Tuscaloosa, and finally, probably you got to look at the receivers. I mean, they signed a big number of wide receivers for a reason, and they signed a great group of receivers last year. But now you bring in some other guys. There can be a lot of competition in that wide receiver room next year, and I think that some of these guys are really going to have a chance to play early. You have Kendrick Law and Aaron Anderson as two wide receivers that are enrolling early, so that's going to be big. Very beneficial for them in their future in Tuscaloosa. Go ahead and get a jump start and start working out and training, and we'll see who ends up making an impact next year. But I feel like it's going to come from somebody in that group.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. An outstanding receiving group here, tight ends as well, and overall just an amazing class. Like you said, a nice little treat there at the end on Wednesday night. Learning that Eli Rix was going to be making the transfer from LSU. Alabama dominating in the state of Louisiana, dominating in Florida, really all over the country. A great class, but, maybe there's some room for improvement here. If there's one group or maybe certain players that they could have added to this class, who would that be? Where could this signing class have gone, a little bit better this year?
Well, I think when you look at it overall, you got to look at on the offensive and defensive line. Alabama only signed 3 offensive linemen and 3 defensive linemen in this class. I think they could have probably taken one more offensive lineman, even though they had a big group last year. We weren't expecting a big group of offensive linemen this year. We were always kind of expecting 3, maybe 4. They ended up signing Elijah Pritchett, Dane Shore, and Tyler Booker. Dane Shore is probably going to have to spend a little bit of time in the weight room and get right, because he's been out of football for 2 years. Even though he's been training and working out privately, he hadn't put the pads on in a couple of years, and that takes a little bit of while to kind of get back into the flow of things. But I'm sure he will pretty quickly. And then with Elijah Pritchett and Tyler Booker, I mean, these are 2 guys that are, very elite offensive linemen, with Booker coming in here in January. So, they're going to get to work. But I certainly think that there were some other offensive linemen out there that were kind of in the mix for Alabama. I still think that, they had an opportunity with, Keontae Goodwin, the big 5-star lineman that ended up signing with Kentucky. He made a trip down to Tuscaloosa, made a couple trips down to Tuscaloosa. He had Ernest Green, who was out of California. Still hasn't announced his decision yet, but I fully expect him to announce for Georgia when he announces on January the 8th at the All-American Bowl. They still may look around and see who's still available, but as of right now, I would lean more towards them looking maybe in the transfer portal, or at least trying to load up in next year's class on the offensive line. And then defensive line. I'm not as concerned about the defensive line as most people probably are, just because the 2023 class is probably the deepest, most talented group of defensive linemen that I have seen in 18 years of covering high school football recruiting. I mean, there's just so many top players from coast to coast, and there's a lot of really good players in the state of Alabama on the defensive front. Obviously, you got to get those guys. You can't let them go out of state, or you can't let them go to Auburn. But with guys like Peter Woods and Kelby Collins, two huge Alabama fans right here in Birmingham, two priority defensive line targets, you got to feel like Alabama's in great shape with both of those guys early in the process. You have, Jaden Wayne up in the Seattle area, who has Alabama at the top of his list. He's a 5-star defensive lineman. There's a lot of other guys that are out there, a lot of guys that have high interest in Alabama, and I think Alabama's going to have a tremendous year. I mean, you look at some of the guys that they signed this year. I mean, we're talking about Curtis Perry, Isaiah Hastings, Jaheim Otis. Probably weren't talking much about those guys this time last year. Maybe Perry a little bit, but not necessarily Jaheim Otis or Isaiah Hastings. So there's always going to be some more guys that are going to pop up, but there's probably a list of about 15 to 17 guys right now on the defensive front that Alabama already has high interest in, and a lot of those guys have high interest in Alabama. So I think 2023, they're really going to load up on the defensive front and be fine. But, as far as the defensive linemen in this class, you got to like, what they did with Jaheim Otis. You got Isaiah Hastings, who's a 6'5", 290-pound defensive end who originally from Toronto, but moved down to the United States back in May, and really has a chance to develop into a pretty spectacular football player. And then obviously Curtis Perry, we've talked about him a lot throughout the years, and this is a guy who registered 23 sacks during his senior season, so highly productive player, and definitely somebody that Alabama was hoping to land last week, and they certainly did.
Yeah, they definitely did. And, a guy that had shown interest in Mississippi, and several players were in this class as well that showed interest at other schools and ended up flipping to those other schools as well. Skinner and Woodard, two guys that were in this class for a bit here. Did either of these decisions come to you as a surprise, or did you see these flips happening? Obviously, you don't want to lose anybody from this class. How essential were these two players? How big were these flips?
Well, Jalil was a little bit of a surprise down the home stretch. I actually noted on Bama Insider on Thursday night that there was some concern that he might end up going to Miami, because there was all these reports that, all right, well, Jalil's going to wait until Friday to announce, and he had announced that probably the week before that he was going to wait until Friday to sign. But the plan was for him to go ahead and sign secretly on Wednesday or Thursday, and then send it in, or then announce it on Friday at a little signing day ceremony with his family. Well, that never happened. He never sent it in. He was still talking to Alabama now. He was talking to Alabama all the way up until Thursday night. He and his family kind of assured Alabama, hey, we're solid, not doing anything. I talked to one of our Miami reporters on Friday morning. They called me in and asked. They said, "Hey, Jalil Skinner's sticking with Alabama," and I said, "Okay." Well, I felt like that was probably the case. Like, yeah, his father told us on on Thursday night that he was Alabama, that he was 100%. So, I asked a few sources about that, and there was still a little bit of concern. So you never know, where things might end up. But in the end, Jalil ends up committing to Miami, signing with Miami. It was a little bit of a surprise. Alabama has 2 tight end commitments, and Amari Knee-Black and Elijah Brown, which Knee-Black and Skinner are very similar. I mean, they're these pass catching tight ends. They can line up just about anywhere. I mean, you certainly would love to add 2 of those guys But getting one is obviously still very big. I mean, you wanted to get two, but getting one was big. So I wouldn't necessarily call it like a major loss, but definitely a very talented player that probably going to do pretty well down in Miami. And then with Robert Woodard, I mean, we've been talking about him since January, or not since January, but since June, as a likely subtraction from Alabama's recruiting class. Just never expected him to sign with Alabama. Did not take an official visit to Alabama. The coaching staff did not visit him during the recruiting period, during the contact period in December. He was actually offered a blue shirt by Alabama, which means you can't recruit a player. He can come in, he can be on scholarship, but he actually can't play his first year. So Alabama offered him a blue shirt. Didn't offer him it wasn't a regular scholarship. He decided against that and, took a regular scholarship offer to Auburn. But yeah, I mean, nothing that surprised us one bit. I mean, Alabama hadn't talked to him that much, really throughout the process, especially late in the process. So we'd certainly expected him to go to Auburn. But I think the big loss there was Jaleel Skinner.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And like you said, a very talented tight end group, regardless. Elijah Brown, for instance, there. But this class would have loved to have Jaleel Skinner as well. And like you said, Robert Wood, you're not a crazy loss. We expected that. I've been talking about him for a while, but flipping to Auburn there, not the craziest surprise. Alabama, for the most part, not too many surprises in general. You had a lot of predictions, guys like Jihad Campbell, Earl Little Jr., Shaz Preston, a pretty easy day, as far as the predictions went on that side of things. Talk about these guys a little bit more, and maybe, if there were any surprises in this Alabama class. It seemed like it was, a pretty good run of predictions there on our show last Tuesday.
Yeah, it was. We really thrilled all of them, all of these guys to Alabama, which you never know until they sign on the dotted line. So the first one that announced for Alabama was Shaz Preston that morning. So getting Shaz on board was exciting for the Crimson Tide. Definitely one of the top wide receivers in the country, the number one wide receiver in Louisiana. Made that official visit to Alabama last weekend, or the final weekend before signing day. So yeah, that was a big deal for Alabama to get him on board. So you got to give a lot of credit to Pete Golding, because LSU came on late. I mean, they had been recruiting him for a long time, but the coaching turnover, kind of put things aside. But then once Frank Wilson, the new assistant coach, was hired, he really went after Shaz, tried to get him in for that official visit the final weekend. But he ends up sticking with his visit to Alabama, ends up signing with Alabama. Then you had Curtis Perry. There was all these rumors floating around. It was kind of funny to me, at least, that all these rumors were floating around late in the process that Curtis Perry was going to Auburn. I always felt like it was Alabama, but I will say, I mean, it was creeping in my mind a little bit. Maybe he is going to Auburn because he has said some things. He said that Auburn was his leader after the Iron Bowl. There's all these rumors going around. There was some confidence coming out of the Auburn side of things all of a sudden. But I think Alabama always felt pretty confident that he was going to go there. And then obviously he announced for Alabama on signing day. He said that UCF was his number 2 school. I have a hard time believing that. I think it was really Auburn. I think Auburn had done a really good job late in the process. I talked to people close to him that said Auburn really made things pretty interesting late with him, but in the end, it never really got extremely close, that it was always Alabama. You had Jihad Campbell announced for Alabama also, and this was a very intriguing prospect because he's 6'4", 235 pounds. Extremely athletic. You watch this film, he's an edge rusher. He's, coming after the quarterback, but he's actually recruited, even though he's rated as some sites might have him as an edge rusher, he's actually, and he's listed as an outside linebacker on Rivals, he's actually recruited as an inside linebacker. So in my opinion, Alabama got 2 of the best inside linebacker prospects in the country with Jihad Campbell and Sean Murphy, who won the high school Butkus Award a couple of weeks ago. So I think Alabama fans have to be really excited about the inside linebacker position, what Alabama was able to do here. And I think Pete Golding did a really good job jumping in on Jihad at the last minute, because he decommitted a week before signing day from Clemson. Alabama had been in touch with him a little bit, had been recruiting him, tried to get him down for an official visit, and he came in for an official, but it was just it was just one night. They spent Friday in Tuscaloosa and then went over to Texas A&M on Saturday and Sunday. So it was pretty close between Alabama and Texas A&M, but Alabama was able to win out, and he's another guy that's going to be at Alabama in January. And you have the fourth commitment of the day for Alabama, which was no surprise to me or to really anybody, was Earl Little Jr. I think he probably tried to create a little bit of suspense in the end, but this is a guy who's been considered Alabama lean since April. Made a couple trips to Tuscaloosa during the summer, and each trip he spent like 3 days in Tuscaloosa. I mean, he has such a great connection with the coaching staff, with the players, with other commitments, and it just always felt like there was no way he was going to go anywhere else. If he would have committed somewhere else, I would have been, absolutely shocked. That might have shocked me more than Travis Hunter signing with Jackson State last week, or at least up there with it. But I think that Alabama was really excited to get Earl Little Jr. officially on board. Miami did make a late run out at him when Mario Cristobal jumped on board, and no surprise there, because Earl's certainly one of the best prospects down in South Florida. His father played at Miami, but after he decided not to take an official visit down to Miami last weekend, I felt very confident that he was going to choose the Crimson Tide. And then the final commitment that we saw, besides Eli Rix on Wednesday night, we'll talk about that here in a second, but the final high school commitment that we saw last week was from Kendrick Law out of Louisiana, out of Shreveport. Freddie Roach, even though we talk about Pete Golden a lot in Louisiana, Freddie Roach actually was the lead recruiter for Kendrick Law throughout the entire process. And Nick Saban went and made a visit with him on that Monday right after the SEC championship. And we had heard pretty strongly after that visit that it was going to be Alabama. Now he ended up taking an official visit over to LSU the final weekend, and there was a lot of talk that maybe LSU was going to be able to turn his attention back towards them, but in the end, Alabama had been in the driver's seat since June. It was going to be really hard for LSU to turn him, even though Alabama had just added, like I said earlier, Chaz Preston and Aaron Anderson, but they ended up getting Kendrick Law as well. And this is a very outstanding athlete that can play a number of positions. He can play running back. He can play wide receiver. He worked out at Alabama's camp as a wide receiver, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's just going to play wide receiver. That's it. I think they're going to line him up at a number of positions, try to figure out what's best for his future. But at the same time, they're going to let him choose. They recruited one of the best athletes in the country, and they want him to be happy. I mean, this is a 10, 4'8", 100-meter guy, probably one of the fastest, if not the fastest player in this recruiting class.
Wow, that says a lot, talking about this recruiting class. One of the fastest I think we've ever seen from Alabama here. And, Kendrick Law, another Louisiana. And a lot of the predictions did come true that next day, but there were some surprises. Travis Hunter flipping from Florida State was one of the craziest headlines on Wednesday. Just such a fun day, really becoming the main signing day. And Demoni Jackson decided to wait a little bit. He made his day Friday, ends up signing with the Trojans there in Southern California. After the coaching change, Lincoln Riley heads west. Nick Saban made an excellent effort at him, and he was strongly considering the Crimson Tide, through the end there, but ultimately does not sign with the group. How big of a loss is this for Alabama? And, that being said, Eli Rix transferring to Alabama later on Wednesday night. How big is that to kind of fill in that void that maybe Alabama fans were expecting with Demoni Jackson?
Well, I do think that Alabama wanted to add one more high school defensive back to its recruiting class. And it had to be someone specific. It had to be somebody that they really wanted, somebody that they spent a lot of effort recruiting and really pursuing and really wanting in their class. So Demoni Jackson decommitted from USC after taking his official visit to Alabama. I think Alabama felt very confident, at that time that he was going to go to Alabama, which I think Demoni probably felt the same way. That's where he was going to go, and unless USC hired a significant coach and brought in some great assistants, he was probably all Alabama. Well, then as we saw, Lincoln Riley ends up getting hired, and I think Alabama still felt like they could land his commitment. But when Dante Williams, the defensive backs coach, I don't know if he's actually going to remain the defensive backs coach, but when he was actually retained by Lincoln Riley, I think that kind of really sold Demoni on sticking with his commitment to USC. I mean, this is a guy, or not sticking, but recommitting to USC. You can't fault him because this is a kid who grew up a diehard USC fan. He always wanted to play there. He lives in LA. A lot of friends go to school there. So, it's always where he wanted to go. Alabama was, more of, obviously the national championships, the development, putting DBs in the league, chance to, win a lot of games and stuff like that, play for Coach Saban. But I think just, seeing a coach come in that, probably has some stability there for a little bit, I think that helped, USC out a lot in the end. And Demoni was really upfront. I mean, as we kind of talked about, there were some kids in this recruiting process that weren't upfront with Alabama. They told them, hey, I'm sticking with my decision, and ended up flipping. Demoni was always upfront with Alabama. He told Alabama, this is what I'm looking for. I love Alabama, but at the same time, USC's home. This is where I'm going to go. And I think Alabama was fine with that. In the end, they appreciated his honesty. So in the end, they end up getting another Mater Day former player and a former 5-star, and Eli Rix, which was obviously big news on signing day. It's not something that's included, at least in the Rivals rankings, but you got to think this is Alabama fans were really excited about that. We put out a little bit of a cryptic tweet on Wednesday night, and had heard that this was happening. Had heard it was probably going to happen within 24 hours. Wasn't sure if it was going to happen on Wednesday night or Thursday morning sometime. But yeah, I mean, Alabama gets a freshman All-American transfer in, a guy that's had several interceptions during his career already at LSU, and now he's heading to Tuscaloosa. So I think he's going to have a chance to really make a big impact early on. He should be there, could potentially be there for bowl practices. Haven't heard anything, but it could also arrive on January the 11th when the new guys report. So we'll keep our eyes open for that. But yeah, I mean, Demoni Jackson goes to USC, but Alabama gets Eli Rix. I mean, that was, I think that's almost an equal trade right there. So I think Alabama coaches are extremely happy. And you kind of just focus on some other DB targets in next year's class. A really good group of DBs in the state of Alabama in 2023, but also kind of throughout the Southeast. So they'll really be focused on some top guys there. But there wasn't really anybody else that they really went after late in the process. I mean, they tried to get Devin Moore, the former Notre Dame commitment who signed with Florida on campus for an official visit. He ended up not taking a trip. They would have loved to have gotten Toriano Pride, who signed with Clemson, to come in for an official. Couldn't get him. For some reason, Alabama just lost interest in Denver Harris. We had talked about Denver Harris for such a long time. He had come back from his ACL injury back during the season, and Alabama went out to see him in November, and then ended up deciding not to go out and see him again in December when the coaches hit the road. Nick Saban didn't make an in-home visit. Coaches didn't go up there. They were, still talking to him a little bit, but I think they were kind of waiting to see what he was going to do in terms of, was he going to wait until the late signing period to sign? If he was, maybe they would revisit that. But they kind of had their eyes on, Demoni Jackson or potentially bringing in Eli Rix, and they decided to go with Eli Rix.
Yeah, like you said, I think it's a fair trade. I mean, Eli Rix, proven talent in the SEC, really exciting player. Potentially other transfers on the way as well. Maybe a teammate of his coming on board. But overall, an excellent signing period. And guys, you're excellent fans of the Alabama Crimson Tide, the best in the business. So we appreciate you being here. Hit that like button while you're with us and leave a comment. Like I said, guys, we're not going to be taking your questions at the end of the show like we typically would. This one's being pre-recorded tonight, but hey, please leave a comment. Let us know who your favorite signee of this class was. Let us know what you think about the Crimson Tide as they get set for their matchup with Cincinnati. And Nick Saban, obviously the head of recruiting, the best recruiter maybe we've ever seen in college football, and makes a great effort, goes on these visits, see these kids But it's not just Nick Saban. There's a lot of assistants, guys like Pete Golding, like Holloman Wiggins, like, a lot of different assistants that make the ultimate effort to get these kids to sign with the Crimson Tide. Who in 2021 made the biggest effort? Which coaches got the biggest players to commit and end up signing? Which coaches, aren't we hearing about other than Nick Saban?
Well, I think you got to look at Pete Golding and Charles Kelly is probably the ace recruiters in this year's class. I mean, Pete Golding did just a tremendous job recruiting the state of Louisiana, which is, despite the coaching changes, a really tough place to recruit. It's not easy to go into Louisiana and recruit top players. And as I mentioned earlier, he was able to get Chaz Preston and Aaron Anderson both on board. They did sign 3 from Louisiana, but Kendrick Law was recruited by Freddie Roach, who also had another really good year for Alabama. But Pete Golding also helped land Jaheim Otis. He was able to go up and get 2 of the best linebackers in the country, Campbell and Sean Murphy. So great job by Coach Pete Golding in this class. And then Charles Kelly, I think you got to give him a lot of credit as well, because he went over to Georgia, signed Elijah Pritchett, which was a big home run win there. Isaiah Bond, a Rivals 100 wide receiver, who decommitted from Florida and signed with Alabama. Jake Pope, and then in the state of Alabama, he had some top players that he heavily recruited and was in charge of their recruitment, including Emmanuel Henderson and Curtis Perry, along with Antonio Kite. So thought that Pete Golding and Charles Kelly kind of separated themselves from everybody else. Freddie Roach had a really good class as well. A lot of in-state guys like Jeremiah Alexander and Kobe Prentice and Traquan Fagans. But, the guys did a lot of really good work outside the state, Pete Golding and Charles Kelly.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Pete Golding, made a great effort and got a lot of these dudes to end up signing with the class, and an excellent class here in 2022. But, it might not be done yet. Are there any remaining targets in play for the Crimson Tide? Maybe some guys that we could see transfer over to the program. What's left for 2022?
If I dollar for every time somebody asked me if Kashawn Boutte was transferring to Alabama, I might be pretty wealthy right now. I mean, that's kind of been the number one asked question since last week. And listen, there's nothing really to talk about there just yet, because he's not in the portal. He hasn't said he's getting in the portal. There was some guy on Twitter who posted that last week, and of course it got everybody talking, but he's not in the portal, so there's no reason to even talk about Kashawn yet. We'll just have to kind of wait and see. Now, if there's a really good player that Alabama feels like can contribute right away in Tuscaloosa and they have a spot, they're going to look around and see who's available and decide if they're going to be able to bring those guys in. As far as high school players, I'm not really seeing anybody else right now joining Alabama's class. Now they might revisit this here in the next couple of weeks, kind of see who's still out there. After losing Jaleel Skinner, they could potentially go after another tight end that's still available in high school. See if there's anybody that they may have missed. Just because somebody might still be uncommitted or may not have a lot of really mean that they're a bad player. I mean, we've seen some guys get offered late in the process before. Josh Jacobs, Eddie Jackson. Those are 2 guys that come to mind that got offered in January of their senior seasons. With Josh Jacobs, he was offered about 2 days before signing day. So stuff like that can happen, and there's always a chance that somebody could be, kind of a diamond in the rough. So just kind of wait and see what happens. But could also look at the transfer portal for potentially another tight end. So we're going to keep our eyes open in that regard. But nobody that jumps out immediately. I mean, there's still some guys that are going to be announcing at these All-American Bowls, but I don't think it's anybody that Alabama fans really need to pay much attention to right now.
Yeah, we're definitely going to keep an eye on it. A lot of interesting names there potentially in the transfer portal. Kashawn Boutte, one of them. Guys, please don't believe everything you see on Twitter there. He is not in the transfer portal quite yet, but we will keep you updated on BamaInsider.com. And guys, go check out the rest of Andrew Bone's work there. Tony Sukalis, the rest of our excellent staff. And don't forget, check out the rest of the YouTube page as well. And as we begin to close it out here tonight, guys, please hit that like button and get in that comment section for me. And, something we talk about a lot is the future. Everyone wants to know what is next for this program in recruiting. As we look ahead to 2023, there's a lot of names we've already been talking about for a while. Arch Manning, of course, a hot name in recruiting. Peter Woods as well. And you mentioned it earlier, an overall excellent defensive line class brewing for the Crimson Tide. But looking into 2023, what are Alabama's biggest needs? Where are they going to start the recruiting efforts this upcoming year?
Well, I think, obviously they'd love to get a quarterback. Always like to get a quarterback in every class, even though they just signed Ty Simpson. I don't know how easy it's going to be to get Arch Manning on board after signing Ty Simpson, but we'll have to wait and see. I mean, Alabama's still very much in the picture for him. I think they're okay at wide receiver right now, but probably going to look at the tight end position. Offensive line going to be very critical. Defensive line, very critical. I think that there's so many defensive line targets that are out there that Alabama's going to have a really good chance to land. That even though they only signed 3 this year, they're really going to have a great chance to sign a big number of defensive linemen in next year's recruiting class. And then probably corner. I think they certainly add some more corners. That's probably going to be a big area. And there's some really good players in the state of Alabama next year. I mean, including 3 that are in the in the top 40 overall in the country with Jahil Hurley. You have A.J. Harris and also Tony Mitchell. If Alabama can get – I don't see them getting all 3 of those guys. If they can get 2 of the 3, they're going to be pretty excited.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Really looking forward to this 2023 class. Some big names there that we're going to keep an eye on. But 2022, now we can take a breath. It is wrapped up. We're a week now removed from it. Your final thoughts here as we reflect on this 2022 early signing class. Some of the best players, obviously we've talked about tonight. Who stands out, and your final thoughts as we close it out here tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest stands out are the ones that we mentioned. I mean, especially at the wide receiver position, the guys that are coming in early that are going to have a chance to contribute, like Amari Neblack or Jeremiah Alexander. I don't think we're going to see Ty Simpson starting next year over Bryce Young, but the fact that he's already getting there and getting just used to being around all the players and learning the system, I think it's obviously very beneficial for his future. But I really appreciate all of our fans that have followed us throughout the entire year. I know it's been a pretty wild ride, but I think all our fans on this channel trust us, and we try to always deliver the goods every single day we're on the show. So we really appreciate it, and I hope you all have a great holiday season, and hopefully get a chance to spend time with your loved ones. We appreciate all the military that's out there that's not going to be able to spend time with their loved ones, but still support us and protect us. And I just lost my best friend this week, which is really tough, to cancer. So I know everybody's had somebody in their life or several people in their life who've succumbed to cancer or just lost somebody in general. And I know it's tough, especially around the holiday season. You always think about them, keep those memories fresh, talk about them. Because I know that, the ones that we've lost, we've had a lot of great times with them throughout the years. So just cherish those moments. And I hope, like I said, hope you all have a great holiday season. And we'll certainly be back before too long.
Yeah, very well said there. Incredibly sorry to hear about the loss. Obviously, our condolences, from everybody at BamaInsider.com. And like you said, Merry Christmas. This is the best time of the year. This is the holiday season, guys. This is bowl season as well. And of course, we're going to be covering all of it. Alabama headed to the Cotton Bowl on December the 31st. But until then, guys, we're going to have player interviews coming out, videos breaking down this matchup, more videos on recruiting just like this one. So don't forget, hit that like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can get that ding every day, and leave some comments for us here on the way out. Go to BamaInsider.com, check out Andrew Bone's work, and go follow him on Twitter at Andrew J. Bone. Until next week, my name is Trey Yanity. For Andrew Bone, this has been Alabama Crimson Tide football recruiting on BamaInsider.com. Happy holidays, everybody. Roll Tide.